There's a moment that keeps returning. Someone asks what you've been working on, and you don't have a clean answer. Not because nothing is happening, but because what's happening doesn't have a shape yet. Nothing solid enough to hand over in one sentence, without it sounding smaller than it feels. You start explaining anyway. Halfway through, you can feel their attention loosen. Not dramatically, just enough. Later, when the room is quiet, the real question appears. Am I actually building something, or am I just telling myself I am? It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like a low, steady pressure that doesn't turn off. The brain quietly registering that the usual signals, recognition, evidence that what you're doing matters, are missing. That feeling has a name, and it's not failure. Before explaining why this is an advantage, let's stay here for a moment, because the discomfort is real, and it deserves to be named before anything else is said about it. Think about what this phase actually feels like on an ordinary day. Not the hardest days, just the ordinary ones. There's work being done, progress being made maybe, but there's no external marker to point to. No number going up, no recognition arriving, just the work and the silence around it, and the background hum of a question that won't fully go away. That hum has a biological source, and understanding it changes what it means. The human brain is wired to measure self-worth through social feedback. Not because of social media, not because of culture, because of survival. For most of human history, invisibility wasn't just uncomfortable, it was genuinely dangerous. Being unseen by the group meant being left behind, and being left behind in a world without grocery stores or central heating or emergency services meant death. People hunted together, survived together. The group was everything. So the brain built a system, a constant background scan asking, am I being seen? Does what I'm doing register with the people around me? When the answer comes back, yes, dopamine, reward, the feeling of mattering. When the answer goes quiet, threat response, low-grade anxiety, the feeling that something needs to be fixed. The problem is this: the brain cannot tell the difference between no one knows me yet and I don't belong anywhere. One is temporary, one is existential, but the brain produces the same response to both, the same low current of unease, the same impulse to do something that will make the silence stop. Which means the anxiety of this phase isn't evidence that something is wrong. It's a brain designed for a different world misfiring in this one, responding to the absence of external confirmation the same way it would respond to actual danger. That doesn't make the feeling disappear, but it changes what it means. It moves it from signal to noise. And that shift is the first thing needed to stay inside this phase without being derailed by it. There's a modern observer of human nature who didn't just theorize about this phase. He spent decades studying the hidden patterns behind power, identity, and human behavior, leaving behind some of the clearest insights into what's actually happening inside it. Robert Greene understood that there are moments when a person steps away from the world that once defined them, not because they have failed, but because the old identity no longer has the strength to carry what they are becoming. When a structure built around recognition, reputation, and external validation begins to collapse, a person is forced to confront who they are without the image they created for others. What follows is a period of withdrawal, less noise, less performance, less dependence on outside approval. Long stretches where the person is forced to examine their motives, their ambitions, their fears, and the hidden patterns that have controlled their decisions. It is not a breakdown. It is not the end. It is the phase where an old identity begins dissolving before a stronger and more intentional one can emerge. The old version disappears before the new version becomes clear. And that space between the two is where most people lose themselves. They mistake uncertainty for failure. They mistake silence for being forgotten. They mistake the absence of recognition for the absence of progress. But this invisible phase is where real transformation happens. You cannot skip it. You cannot rush it. The only way through is through. Now think about this phase. No external recognition. Work without visible shape. That low pressure that doesn't turn off. How closely does that map against what happens when a person is forced to rebuild themselves from the inside? Something has shifted or is shifting. The old version, the old job, the old circle, the old idea of what success was supposed to look like is loosening, and what's coming next isn't clear yet. Robert Greene would not see this as failure. He would see it as a necessary period of reconstruction, where a person begins separating their true desires from the expectations that were placed upon them. But here's what most people miss about this process. The invisible phase isn't just a period to survive. It has a specific internal function, one that can only happen in the absence of an audience. It is the gradual process of becoming more fully yourself, not the self shaped by other people's expectations, not the self assembled for performance. The actual one, the one that exists underneath all the roles, images, and adaptations accumulated over a lifetime of trying to belong. The process of becoming yourself is not self-improvement. It's not optimization. It's not becoming a better version of the existing self. It's the much slower, much less linear process of discovering what is actually beneath the roles, expectations, and identities that have been built over years of trying to fit into the world around you. Robert Greene's work on human nature repeatedly explores this idea. People often spend their lives refining an image, improving a performance, and strengthening a version of themselves that was created to gain approval, recognition, or acceptance. But real transformation begins when a person stops asking how they can become more impressive to others and starts asking what is actually true about themselves. And at the center of this process is an encounter with the hidden parts of human nature, the motives that are not always admitted, the fears that are not always acknowledged, the desires that are often pushed away because they do not fit the image someone wants to maintain. Not the bad parts of a person, just the unseen ones, the parts that exist but haven't been fully recognized as part of who someone understands themselves to be. Most people spend their entire lives managing these hidden parts, rather than confronting them, keeping certain thoughts out of sight, presenting only the acceptable pieces of themselves to the world and eventually to themselves. They become experts at controlling appearances while remaining unaware of the forces operating beneath the surface. To do real work on yourself, something specific is required. The ability to look inward without controlling how the process appears to others, without the instinct, automatic, social, almost impossible to fully override, to curate, to perform, to show only what's acceptable. That's impossible in front of an audience. When people are watching, performance begins. Not from dishonesty, just from the most basic human desire to be accepted. Certain parts get selected for display, others get hidden away. The process of understanding yourself becomes another performance of understanding yourself, which produces a very different result. The performance might look like growth. It might even feel like growth, but it does not create the internal shift that true confrontation with yourself creates, because the hidden parts of human nature only reveal themselves when the performance stops. The invisible phase, no audience, no image to protect, no external confirmation arriving to shape behavior, is the only condition under which the real encounter can happen. This phase isn't an obstacle to transformation. It is the condition that makes transformation possible. The discomfort of being unseen is, in this sense, the price of admission to the only process that produces a self-worth building on. There's one more distinction worth understanding, and it might be the most important one. Robert Greene draws a sharp distinction between the person someone truly is and the image they construct for the world. The roles, the reputation, the presentation assembled for others. The problem is when the image gets mistaken for reality. When a person becomes so identified with the identity they've built that they lose access to who they actually are underneath it. The image was supposed to be a tool. It becomes a trap. And this collapse, the self into the public image, happens most completely when recognition arrives before internal development has done its work. With an audience comes a feedback loop. Certain things get rewarded. Certain behaviors get reinforced. The public identity forms around what works externally, not what's true internally. And gradually, without anyone intending it, a life gets built on top of an image that was constructed for an audience rather than discovered through solitude. There's a concept in anthropology called liminal space, the threshold state between one identity and another. A liminal phase is the in-between, after the old identity has ended, before the new one is formed. It's the gap, where the previous version of yourself no longer controls your decisions, but the next version has not fully emerged yet. This phase is structurally uncomfortable. The mind wants resolution. It wants a clear answer to who this is and where this fits. The absence of that answer registers as threat, as something to escape from as quickly as possible. But this space is also where transformation actually happens, because it's the only space where the old identity has released its hold, where the patterns of the old self have loosened, and where something genuinely new can form, rather than just being layered on top of what already existed. The identity formed inside this phase, formed while no one is watching, comes from somewhere internal. There's no audience to shape it from outside, which means it ends up built on something real, rather than something rewarded. That's the order that matters. Self first, image second. And that order is only available now, while no one is watching, while the image hasn't hardened, while the doorway is still open. Before getting to the advantages, there's something worth naming directly. Because theory is one thing, but this phase has a specific texture, a specific set of internal experiences that don't get talked about much, because they're hard to explain to people who aren't inside them, and recognizing them matters, because part of what makes this phase so disorienting is that it's unfamiliar. There's no cultural script for it, no map, so here's what it actually tends to look like. The work is moving, but there are no external markers to measure it against, no milestones that other people can see. Progress feels real from the inside, but invisible from the outside. And the gap between those two things creates a kind of cognitive dissonance that's difficult to articulate. The work matters, but there's no way to prove that it matters to anyone else, or sometimes even to yourself on the harder days. Questions start appearing that didn't used to be there. Not small questions, large ones, about what actually matters, about whether the direction is right, about who this work is really for and why. These questions don't feel like distractions. They feel important. They feel like the questions that should have been asked earlier and maybe weren't. And they don't have clean answers yet, which is part of what makes this phase so uncomfortable and also so necessary. Some relationships start to shift. The people who knew the previous version, the version with a clear title, a clear role, a clear place in a recognizable structure. Some of them don't quite know what to do with this version. The conversations become slightly harder to navigate, not because anything has gone wrong between you, but because the old script doesn't apply anymore, and the new one isn't written yet. And people tend to relate to the image, the role, the position, not always the person underneath it. And then there's the part that's hardest to admit out loud. Somewhere underneath the discomfort, there's something that feels almost like relief. The absence of an audience means the absence of performance. Now, for the specific mechanics, not theory, the actual structural advantages of being in this phase right now. The first advantage is the most immediate. Being unknown eliminates the cost of failure. Think about what it means to have a public reputation. Not fame, just visibility, a following, an image. People who have formed expectations. Now think about what happens when someone in that position wants to change direction, try something uncertain, something they're not sure will work. The decision isn't just personal anymore. Every move is observed. A public failure isn't just a setback. It's a setback in front of everyone who invested in the image that was built. The cost of being wrong isn't only the lesson, it leaves a mark. This is why established creators keep making the same content, long after it stopped feeling genuine. Why people in visible positions stay in lanes they've outgrown. The cost of being wrong in public is high enough that risk gets avoided not from cowardice, but from a rational calculation about what failure would cost. That calculation doesn't apply here. When no one is watching, direction can change completely without registering as inconsistency. Something can be tried and abandoned without becoming part of a public narrative. The work can be genuinely bad, And the only consequence is the lesson, not the social fallout, not the damage to an image that took years to build. This is unlimited experimentation at zero reputational cost. It is only available now before the image forms, before the audience arrives, before the first version of the reputation becomes impossible to change. Robert Greene's study of power and mastery shows that those who eventually create influence often spend years developing in silence, refining their skills before the world begins paying attention. The second advantage is less obvious, but in some ways more consequential. This is the only time truly clean feedback is available. When a known creator publishes something, the audience doesn't encounter the work in isolation. They encounter it through the lens of everything they already believe about the person who made it. Admiration inflates the response. Skepticism deflates it. Very few people are capable of separating what something is from who made it. The feedback a visible person receives is almost always contaminated, inflated by loyalty, deflated by criticism, distorted by expectation. It becomes genuinely difficult to know what's actually resonating versus what's being carried by the reputation. The signal exists, but it can't be trusted cleanly. But there's a deeper problem than just distorted feedback, one that doesn't get discussed much. When a person never experiences clean signal in the early phase, when recognition arrives before the work has been tested honestly, they never develop the internal calibration that comes from knowing, without any doubt, that something worked because it actually worked. That calibration is not a small thing. It's the difference between confidence that comes from genuine evidence and confidence that's entirely dependent on external validation. One is portable. It travels with the person, stays stable when the audience changes or grows quiet. The other is fragile, entirely contingent on the feedback loop continuing to confirm it. Without that early calibration, the feedback loop becomes the compass, and a compass built entirely on external validation will always drift toward what gets rewarded, not what's true, toward what performs, not what matters, toward what people respond to today, not what the work actually is. The clean signal is available right now, before the noise starts, before reputation contaminates the response. While the only explanation for something landing is that it actually landed, not that people were already prepared to accept it, because of an image that existed before the work. That's not a consolation prize for being unknown. It's the only way to build the kind of internal judgment that holds up when everything else changes. The third advantage is the hardest one to sit with, because it requires accepting something most people would rather not hear. Real transformation cannot be rushed, and the cost of trying is specific. People who try to escape this invisible phase too quickly don't actually escape it. They postpone it. The unresolved questions about who they actually are and what they actually value don't get answered. They get buried under the identity constructed on top of them, and the unresolved conflict eventually returns. The first form is chronic performance fatigue, the feeling of playing a role that used to fit or never quite fit, but has become too established to easily leave. The work gets done, the image gets maintained. The reputation continues growing, but the gap between the public self and the private one keeps widening. And the energy required to bridge that gap, to keep performing a version of yourself that isn't fully yours, compounds quietly over years. The second form is the collapse and rebuild cycle. Visible, successful people who suddenly withdraw, who announce they're taking a break or stepping back to reassess, who disappear for a period and come back changed, or sometimes don't come back at all. From the outside, it looks like burnout or a loss of direction, or a sudden change in priorities. From the inside, it's almost always the same thing. The internal work that was never completed in the invisible phase, now being done in public at enormous cost. The third form is the most insidious. It's the quiet, persistent sense of disconnection that settles into people who built a public identity before a private foundation was ready. Not simply insecurity, but something more specific. The sense that the person being presented to the world is real enough to maintain, but not real enough to fully inhabit. That a version of the self became established early, performing, succeeding, accumulating recognition, while the deeper questions about identity and purpose remained unanswered underneath. This invisible phase is the alternative to all of that. It's the work being done in the right order, the foundation being tested before the structure goes up, the internal understanding being developed before the public image takes control. That work is happening now, underground where no one can see it, which is exactly where it needs to happen. No summary, no list of things to do, just something that needs to be said plainly and directly. The phase where no one knows who you are. It isn't a waiting room. It isn't the hallway between the old life and the real one. It isn't the part that has to be endured before things actually begin. It is the thing happening now in real time, whether or not it feels that way from inside it. There's a particular difficulty to this phase that's worth naming. The work is real. The effort is real. The questions being asked, the things being slowly figured out. The accumulation of something that doesn't have a name yet. All of it is real, but none of it is legible from the outside. And in a world that constantly signals that visibility equals validity, the absence of external confirmation starts to feel like absence of progress. But it is not an absence of progress. Progress in this phase doesn't look like progress. It looks like confusion, like sitting with questions that don't resolve cleanly, like work that doesn't announce itself, like a version of the self that's in the process of becoming, but can't yet say what it is becoming. That is formation, not stagnation, not failure, not falling behind. That's hard to hold from inside it, because from inside the only available comparison is what other people appear to have. The announcements, the visible markers, the evidence everywhere that other people are arriving at something, while this moment feels like standing still. But standing still is not what's actually happening here. The self is forming before the reputation does. The foundation is being tested before the structure goes up. The work is being done in the only conditions that allow it to be done honestly, without an audience, without performance, without the pressure of an image to maintain. And what can't be seen from inside, the cost of being on the other side of that screen, what gets traded away for visibility. How many people who look like they've arrived are privately exhausted by the distance between who they appear to be and who they actually are? How many of them would give something significant to be back here in this phase, with this freedom before the persona locked in? That distance doesn't exist here yet. The persona hasn't hardened. The self is still being formed, and the work being done right now, however invisible, however uncertain, is being done by someone who is still genuinely themselves. Robert Greene has often explored a similar reality of human nature, the danger of looking outward for identity, approval, and direction instead of developing a strong internal foundation. Most people read this as a comment about success versus failure. It's actually something more specific, looking outside at what other people have and how others are being received at the visible markers of arrival is a kind of illusion, not in the positive sense. In the sense of living inside, a projection of measuring your real internal progress against an imagined external reality and finding the real thing lacking. Looking inside is the alternative. Not isolation, not withdrawal, but the honest, uncomfortable, necessary process of paying attention to what's actually happening internally, to what's forming, what's dissolving, what's becoming clearer instead of using other people's visible lives as the primary reference point for your own. This phase forces that inward turn, not as philosophy, but as practical reality. The external confirmation isn't there, so eventually the internal compass has to be found, or developed or rebuilt from something more honest than borrowed expectations. That is the work of rebuilding yourself, and it is the work that everything else gets built on. The people who rushed through this, who manufactured visibility before they were ready, who built public identities before private foundations were formed. Many of them spent years quietly, trying to find their way back to exactly this, to the freedom of being unknown, to the space to ask honest questions without an audience watching the process, to the condition where the self could still be found before the image hardened over it. That space exists right now, and it is the only phase where it's possible to become genuinely who you actually are before anyone is watching. before anything is at stake, before the world starts deciding for you. The fact that no one knows who you are yet is not a deficit. It is the last best kind of freedom there is, and it's only available once.